Hello, welcome again to this week's youth video. Since September, we have been talking about the gospel, specifically the work of Jesus and what that means in our life, and how the gospel is good news for us. And so as spring break is coming up, we are actually going to wrap up this series today. This is going to be the last kind of message about the gospel that I'm going to share with you. So to recap what we've been talking about, in its most simple form, the gospel is Jesus. And it can be so much more complex than that, and there's so many more aspects of the gospel. The idea that Jesus saves us from sin, that he loves us, that he replaces religion, and all of these different aspects of what the good news actually is in comparison to Jesus. But at its most core foundation, that's what we've been talking about, is that Jesus himself is the good news. He is the gospel for our lives. And so if you learn anything from the last few months of this series, I hope that's what you hear, is that the good news is that Jesus actually came to be one of us, to be human, in order to show his love for us in such a crazy way. In his life, he was teaching and he was doing miracles, and he died and he rose again, all to display this crazy love that God has for us. And so I definitely want you to consider that. Perhaps if you've been in youth for long enough, you've had Lou as a youth pastor, and perhaps you've heard from her when someone questions what it is that you believe, or ask really hard questions about Christianity. One of the things you can respond with is saying, I don't know all of that, but I can tell you about Jesus. And so I hope that is what you can take from this, is understanding that even though there's so many kind of complex parts of the Bible, at the very least, if you can say, I know that Jesus loves you, that is such a foundational thing, and such a great way for you to share what you believe about Jesus. And so now, as we get ready to have a few weeks off over spring break, I want to kind of begin to ask the question of now what? Like, what is the next step? What can we do about all the stuff that we've learned? We've established that Jesus loves us. We've established that in coming to earth, he has removed any restrictions that we have to get to God. He has made a direct path to him. And so what does that mean for our lives? So I'm going to suggest 5 kind of next steps for you to consider. So number 1, tell someone and talk about it. Understanding the work of Jesus in your life is so much more interesting when you talk about it with someone else. I know some of my favorite conversations have been late night conversations about God with my friends, and trying to figure out what it means and all these different ideas. And so maybe you've got peers, friends who are kind of around your age who you want to talk about that stuff with. Or maybe you want to talk to myself or another leader. We're always willing to get coffee, go for a walk, do something, and talk about your life, and talk about who Jesus is, and how God is working in your life and all that stuff. The second next step is to be involved in church. And I know that that's really hard to do these days. We're not actually meeting in person, and so being involved in church doesn't always look the same, but it's definitely worth considering that being involved in a church like this, even in youth group, is an awesome way of living out your faith. And so I encourage you to keep taking part in Wednesday nights. It's a good place to hang out and talk about God, and when we're back in person, find ways to involve yourself at church. Number 3, as a way of moving forward, I would say, is baptism. And maybe that's a big scary word that you haven't really thought of too much, but all it is a public declaration of your decision to follow Jesus. So if you're coming to that point in your life where you think that this is absolutely where you want to go, that you really want to follow Jesus, then talk to me about baptism. It's a great way of standing in front of people here at the church and just saying, I'm committing to following Jesus, and I want to take this next step in my journey. And so I consider it to be really important, and I'm probably going to talk about it a bit more in the coming months. But yeah, definitely kind of keep that idea in mind. Number 4 is to find some way to serve. Jesus' work in the world was highly defined by the way that he served other people. And so as a way of following Jesus, I encourage you to think about your life and think about ways that you can help and serve other people without necessarily asking for anything in return. That is a great way to live out the gospel, the good news in your life. And finally, I would suggest talking to God. Prayer is the way that we talk to God, and I'm going to suggest kind of a prayer when we meet in person on Wednesday. But I think one of the things that stopped me from praying when I was younger is hearing other people pray and saying really fancy words, and I didn't think that I had that vocabulary to make these like grandiose, fancy prayers. And in reality, that's not necessary. Like when you want to build up a relationship with a friend, you really got to talk to them. And so I encourage you to take time to pray if you can find a way to make that a regular part of your day. And it doesn't have to be, fancy and perfectly polished. It can just be talking about your day with God and hopefully setting aside some time to listen to Him and make space for Him to speak to you back. So hopefully there's something of value in those 5 things. I do stand behind all of those ideas, and I'll be happy to talk more with you about that on Wednesday. But for now, I invite you to consider what is the aspect of the gospel that you think is really most resonating with you. And I'm going to put a whole bunch on the screen right now. And so I invite you to pause the video and just kind of look at those. And which one really sticks with you? Why do you think that's really important to you? And what's something you can do about that? What's one way that you can respond? So we'll talk a bit more about that on Wednesday. And aside from that, I'll see you then.